Max stood in his vast living room, which overlooked his sprawling estate. He was a man who had everything: money, influence, and a taste for adrenaline that only his extreme pranks could satisfy. Tonight, he had gathered his closest friends, a mix of thrill-seekers and creatives, to unveil his latest and boldest idea yet. They knew Max well enough to understand that when he said intense, he meant it. Last year, he had pulled off a scare so good that the mayor himself had ended up in a therapy session. This year, Max's eyes gleamed with a new kind of madness. "All right, everyone, gather around," Max said, clapping his hands to get their attention. He pointed to a massive blueprint pinned on the wall, its edges lined with detailed sketches of monsters, twisting corridors, and hidden traps. "This year's Halloween is going to be legendary," he began, a grin spreading across his face. "I'm going to create the most intense Halloween maze this town has ever seen." "No, scratch that. The most intense Halloween maze the world has ever seen." "You always say that, Max," teased Jeremy, one of his longtime partners in mischief, though there was a hint of excitement in his voice. "What makes this maze different from the ones before?" Max's smile grew wider, almost maniacal. "This isn't just a maze, Jeremy. It's going to be a psychological experience that leaves people questioning what's real and what's not. Hidden passages, animatronic creatures that will make you swear they're alive, and a storyline that traps people in their own fears." One of the friends, Lisa, a professional horror writer, leaned forward, her curiosity piqued. "What kind of storyline are you thinking?" she asked. "Imagine this," Max said, pacing back and forth. "The maze is filled with subtle clues and hints that guide them into believing they're being watched the entire time. The sounds, the lights, even the air itself will seem alive with danger. By the time they reach the exit, their minds will be so disoriented, they'll think they're in a horror movie they can't escape from." A murmur of approval rippled through the group. They could already see the looks of terror on the faces of the maze-goers, and that image alone was worth it. 2 weeks later, Max was seated in a sleek, high-tech conference room with his team of designers, engineers, and special effects artists. The table was cluttered with tablets, sketchbooks, and a 3D model of the maze layout. The air buzzed with anticipation as Max stood before them, his energy infectious. "Okay, folks, let's get into the guts of this beast," he said, his eyes darting to each section of the blueprint projected on the screen behind him. "This maze needs to be a living, breathing nightmare. I'm talking hidden passages that open up when you least expect it and walls that seem to move." One of the designers, a tech wizard named Brian, nodded eagerly. "We can use motion sensors to trigger animatronics and fog machines. Imagine walking down a narrow corridor, and suddenly, a life-size creature lunges out of the darkness, its breath steaming in the cold air. We can sync it with sound effects to amplify the scare." Max's grin was practically splitting his face. "Yes, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Make it feel like they're not alone in there, like something is always lurking just out of sight." He flipped to another section of the plans, where the corridors twisted into almost impossible angles. "Here, we'll add fog machines and distorted mirrors that mess with their depth perception. I want them to feel like they're in a maze they'll never get out of." Lisa chimed in, her eyes alight with inspiration. "What if we added whispers? Like barely audible voices that seem to come from everywhere and nowhere at once? That would freak anyone out, thinking they're hearing things." "Brilliant," Max exclaimed. "Let's record some eerie whispers and have them randomly play throughout the maze. And maybe a child's laughter, just to keep it extra creepy." The room buzzed with excitement as ideas flew around, the team feeding off Max's enthusiasm. They could already picture the guests stumbling through the dark, terror etched on their faces, completely unaware of what awaited them at the end. But as the meeting neared its conclusion, Max's expression grew even more intense. He leaned forward, both hands on the table, and dropped his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "One last touch," he said, locking eyes with each member of the team. "We're going to end this maze with a twist that no one will see coming." The room went quiet, everyone hanging on his every word. "At the very end of the maze, when they think they're finally safe, we're going to stage a fake kidnapping. We'll have actors in realistic costumes jump out, grab one of the guests, and drag them away screaming. I want it to look so convincing that the rest of the group won't know if they're next." A ripple of nervous laughter spread through the team. Brian raised an eyebrow, looking half impressed, half worried. "Max, you're really going all in on this one, aren't you? What if people panic too much?" "That's the whole point," Max said with a wild laugh. "I want them to leave this maze doubting everything they thought was real. I want them to wake up at night, sweating, wondering if they're still in that nightmare. This isn't just a prank. It's an experience that'll haunt them long after Halloween is over." As dawn broke over Max's sprawling estate, the once serene landscape was now buzzing with activity. Trucks filled with construction materials, fog machines, and eerie decor arrived one after another. Workers in hard hats and reflective vests moved with purpose, unloading crates of animatronic parts, heavy black curtains, and enough fake cobwebs to shroud an entire town. Max stood at the center of it all, directing the flow like a conductor leading an orchestra. "Let's move those crates of fog machines over to Section A," Max shouted, pointing toward the dense thicket where the maze's entrance would begin. "I want the fog so thick they can't see their own hands in front of their faces." His eyes gleamed with a mix of excitement and control as he watched the landscape transform into a labyrinth of terror. Massive wooden panels were set into place to create the maze's twisting pathways. The corridors were intentionally narrow, designed to make anyone walking through feel trapped and claustrophobic. Workers installed hidden trapdoors and secret panels that led to nowhere or back to earlier sections of the maze, enhancing the disorienting effect. At the maze's core, the most elaborate set piece was being constructed, a towering structure with multiple layers designed to confuse and mislead. The walls were adorned with eerie artwork, faded and cracked to give the illusion of ancient ruins. Gothic statues stood at every corner, their hollow eyes seeming to follow anyone who dared pass by. Max watched as the final touches were added to this central nightmare, nodding in approval. This wasn't just a maze. It was a living, breathing horror story. The following week, Max was back on the estate, this time overseeing the installation of the animatronic creatures that would bring his twisted vision to life. Engineers carefully adjusted the settings on each animatronic, making sure their movements were smooth, lifelike, and utterly terrifying. There were grotesque monsters that crawled out from hidden crevices, ghouls with eyes that glowed in the darkness, and sinister figures that lunged out of the shadows with bone-chilling realism. Max crouched next to one of the larger creatures, a ghastly zombie with decayed skin and hollow eyes. He pressed a button on a control panel, and the zombie sprang to life, its jaw snapping open in a silent scream as its arms reached out to grab anyone in its path. "Perfect," Max said, a satisfied grin spreading across his face. He turned to the sound engineer who was tweaking the audio setup nearby. "Let's add the layer of whispers Lisa suggested to this section. Something that's barely audible at first, like distant voices calling out for help. And when they least expect it, hit them with a loud scream echoing from all directions." The engineer nodded, adjusting the controls to create the desired effect. As he tested the system, the maze filled with a haunting symphony of moans, whispers, and occasional blood-curdling shrieks that seemed to come from every corner. The air felt electric, charged with the kind of terror that gets under your skin and stays there. Even the workers who had been installing the equipment all day couldn't help but look over their shoulders as they went about their tasks. Max took a deep breath, absorbing the atmosphere they had created. This was no ordinary haunted house. This was an experience designed to crawl into people's minds and never leave. With the maze nearing completion, it was time for the final element, the actors. Max had hired a troupe of seasoned performers, each skilled in the art of horror. They gathered in the heart of the maze, dressed in their twisted costumes, faces already painted with grotesque makeup. Max stood before them like a director on a movie set, his energy infectious. "All right, listen up," Max called out. "This isn't your typical Halloween scare job. We're not here to just jump out and say boo. We're here to make people believe that they are in real danger. I want screams that send chills down their spines, movements that look so natural it's impossible to tell you're acting." The actors nodded, their faces serious as they took in his instructions. Max led them through a series of rehearsals, coaching them on how to move stealthily through the maze, when to appear, and how to contort their bodies to look unnatural and menacing. One by one, the actors practiced their roles, perfecting the art of the sudden lunge, the silent creep, and the blood-curdling scream. "Remember," Max said, pacing back and forth, "the highlight of the night is the fake kidnapping scene. That's where we seal the deal. When you grab that guest, I want it to look so real that everyone around them goes into pure survival mode. No hesitation, no second-guessing. It has to be flawless." He demonstrated the scene himself, showing the actors exactly how to grab someone, how to struggle convincingly without actually hurting them, and how to vanish into the shadows like they'd never been there. The actors followed his lead, their movements getting more refined with each attempt. The rehearsal space echoed with screams so realistic they raised the hair on the back of your neck. As they wrapped up the training session, Max gave them a final piece of advice. "Fear is all about control," he said, his eyes gleaming with a mix of passion and darkness. "We're going to guide them right to the edge of that cliff, and then just when they think they're safe, we're going to push them off. This isn't just a scare. It's an experience they'll never forget." The actors left with their roles drilled into their minds, knowing that come Halloween night, they were not just performers. They were the orchestrators of fear. Max stood alone in the maze, now fully realized and pulsing with dark energy, and took in the sight with satisfaction. He knew that every hidden door, every flicker of light, every scream that echoed through these halls would leave a mark on anyone who dared to enter. And he couldn't wait to see their faces when they encountered his ultimate twist. Chapter 3: Buzz. The news about Max's elaborate Halloween spread like wildfire through the small town. Cafes, school hallways, and office break rooms buzzed with the latest rumors. "Did you hear about Max's maze this year?" whispered a group of teenagers huddled together after school, their eyes wide with anticipation. "They say it's got real traps that make you feel like you're in a horror movie." Adults weren't immune to the excitement either. Local parents swapped stories at the grocery store, trying to guess what surprises Max had in store. "My kids are begging me to take them," one father said, laughing nervously. "But after last year, I'm not sure if my heart can handle it." Social media was ablaze with speculation, theories, and even conspiracy posts about what Max might have planned. Max's reputation for creating mind-bending pranks only added to the frenzy, and everyone in town was trying to secure their spot to experience the thrill firsthand. As Halloween night approached, the town seemed to transform into a living, breathing movie set. Local costume shops were flooded with last-minute shoppers hunting for the perfect look, and the shelves were quickly emptied of anything remotely spooky. Max himself made a dramatic appearance in the days leading up to Halloween, dressed in a custom-made ringmaster costume. He wore a black top hat, a blood-red tailcoat with gold accents, and carried a cane with a skull-shaped handle. As he paraded through town, he handed out cryptic flyers that simply read, "Are you brave enough?" followed by the date of the maze's opening. Everywhere he went, people's eyes followed him, whispering excitedly. Max had become the unofficial king of Halloween, and his sinister ringmaster costume only added to his larger-than-life presence. Kids and adults alike begged to take selfies with him, each interaction fueling the excitement that this year's event would be the most unforgettable yet. People put more effort into their costumes than ever before, determined to look their absolute best for Max's big event. Classic witches with pointed hats, elegant vampires with velvet cloaks, and even zombies that looked straight out of a Hollywood film roamed the streets. Families dressed as famous horror movie characters, from iconic monsters to sinister clowns, each hoping their outfit would be the talk of the night. Just a week before Halloween, Max dropped the biggest surprise yet. His maze would be invite-only. He announced that there would be a limited number of tickets available for purchase, and once they were gone, that was it. The announcement sent shockwaves through the town. Everyone who had been on the fence about attending suddenly felt an urgent need to be part of the exclusive event. In less than an hour, all the tickets were gone. The people who hadn't acted fast enough took to social media to vent their frustration, pleading for another chance or offering to pay double for a ticket. Max responded to the outcry with a cryptic message on his social media account. "Only the bravest souls will get in. See you on Halloween night, if you dare." As the night approached, those lucky enough to have secured a spot felt like they'd won the lottery. Conversations shifted from mere anticipation to outright bragging about their chance to experience the infamous maze firsthand. The town was abuzz, the anticipation was palpable, and everyone knew one thing for sure: Max's maze was going to be the event of the year. Chapter 4: Night of Terror. As dusk settled over the town, Max's estate became a spectacle of lights and shadows. The maze's entrance, draped in fog and illuminated by flickering lanterns, looked like the gateway to another world. Guests began to arrive in waves, their elaborate costumes blending into the eerie atmosphere. There were werewolves with glowing eyes, witches with cauldrons bubbling over with dry ice, and ghosts that seemed to float across the ground. Max, in his sinister ringmaster costume, stood at the entrance, greeting each guest with a wicked grin and a tip of his top hat. "Welcome, brave souls, to the maze of your nightmares," he said in a theatrical voice, his eyes glinting with mischief. "Once you enter, there's no turning back. Are you sure you're ready?" Guests laughed nervously, snapping selfies with Max as he towered over them like a figure straight out of a horror film. The air was thick with the scent of fall leaves, pumpkin spice, and the distant crackle of bonfires. People whispered excitedly among themselves, daring each other to be the first to enter. The first group of guests hesitated for a moment, then stepped into the maze's entrance, swallowed by the thick fog that seemed to pulse with an unnatural life. As they moved further in, the temperature dropped, and the air grew still. Suddenly, Without warning, a monstrous figure sprang from the darkness. A twisted, animatronic creature with glowing red eyes and claws that seemed to swipe at them. Screams echoed through the night as the group stumbled back, laughing with relief when they realized it was just a machine. But the maze was relentless. Every few steps, something new leapt out. A grotesque ghoul lunging from a hidden alcove, hands reaching from the ground as if clawing their way out of a grave, eerie shadows that danced on the walls with no visible source. The sound effects were perfectly timed, filling the air with whispers, creaks, and distant, haunting cries that seemed to come from all directions. Panic and excitement mixed in the guests' expressions as they tried to navigate the maze's twisting paths. Each corner brought new terrors, and their laughter quickly turned to gasps and shrieks of genuine fear. The deeper the guests went, the more disoriented they became. The fog thickened, and the walls seemed to close in, narrowing to the point where they had to turn sideways to squeeze through. The once confident laughter died down to hushed whispers and anxious breaths. The maze was alive now, feeding off their fear, its design playing tricks on their minds. As they turned another corner, they found themselves in a dead end surrounded by mirrors that distorted their reflections. Some showed them as twisted, ghostly versions of themselves, while others appeared to move even when they stood still. "Which way did we come from?" one guest asked, his voice shaky, but no one could answer. It was as if the maze had swallowed the path behind them, leaving them trapped in a nightmare of their own making. The sound of a child's faint laughter echoed through the air, sending chills down their spines. "Did you hear that?" a woman whispered, clutching her friend's arm. The laughter grew louder, followed by a sudden loud bang that made them jump, their nerves now stretched to the breaking point. With each step they took, the maze seemed to twist reality itself. Doors that led nowhere, paths that looped back into each other, and shadows that seemed to follow them. It all blurred together in a surreal blend of fear and confusion. The guests were no longer sure if they were still in the maze or if they had wandered into another world entirely. And that's exactly how Max had planned it. Chapter 5. Trick or Treat. Deep within the maze, just past the most disorienting section, a group of actors prepared for their roles. They were hidden behind secret panels, dressed in tattered, black clothing and wearing eerie, expressionless animal masks. Max had positioned them strategically, ensuring they remained unseen until the perfect moment. The actors' breaths were steady, their movements precise, and their eyes focused, knowing that their timing had to be flawless. Max, watching from a concealed control room nearby, gave them a nod through the small monitor feed. He could see the guests approaching the final stretch of the maze, their nerves frayed and their expressions a mix of confusion and fear. "Get ready," Max whispered into his earpiece. "Wait until they think they've made it out. That's when we hit them." The actors adjusted their masks and tightened their grips on the ropes and fake weapons they would use to stage the abduction. The atmosphere was electric, crackling with anticipation. They knew this was the moment Max had been building toward all night, the climax that would turn his elaborate prank into a legend. Just as the group of guests stumbled toward what they thought was the exit, they breathed sighs of relief, their tense laughter signaling their belief that the terror was over. "We made it," someone exclaimed, reaching out to push open the large wooden doors that marked the end of the maze. But the moment the doors swung open, the actors sprang into action. Out of the darkness, masked figures leapt forward, grabbing one of the guests with an iron grip. The victim, a young man dressed as a vampire, screamed as he was yanked backward, his pleas for help ringing through the night. "No! Let go of me!" he shouted, thrashing as the actors dragged him into the shadows. The rest of the group froze in shock, their eyes wide and mouths open in horror. The masked figures, their faces twisted in monstrous expressions, looked so real, so menacing, that no one doubted the authenticity of what they were seeing. One of the actors screamed, "Run! Run if you want to live!" before disappearing with the struggling guest into the darkness. For a heartbeat, there was complete silence, a moment where disbelief hung heavy in the air. Then, all at once, the silence shattered. Chaos erupted as the remaining guests screamed and scattered, their fear taking over. They sprinted in all directions, some stumbling and tripping over the maze's uneven floor, while others clawed at the walls, desperate to find another way out. In their panic, no one remembered it was supposed to be a maze designed for fun. They were now in full flight or fight mode, believing that their lives were in actual danger. "Get out! They're coming for us!" someone yelled, their voice trembling with terror. Guests shoved past each other in their desperation, their carefully crafted costumes now in disarray, torn and smeared with dirt. The eerie whispers and chilling sound effects that had seemed like harmless fun earlier now felt like the soundtrack to their doom. Max watched the scene unfold on his monitor, his grin wide as he saw the raw, unfiltered panic spread through the maze. The expressions on their faces, the sheer terror in their eyes. This was exactly what he had planned, and it was playing out even better than he'd imagined. This wasn't just fear, it was utter, chaotic pandemonium, the kind that would be talked about for years to come. As the actor stayed hidden in the darkness, maintaining the illusion of the abduction, Max knew one thing for certain. This was no longer just a Halloween prank. This was the moment when his maze transformed from a thrill ride into a full-blown legend of terror. And Halloween would never be the same again. Chapter 6. Chaos. The maze had become a scene of utter chaos. The moment the fake kidnapping took place, it was as if a switch had flipped inside the minds of the guests. Fear turned into a primal instinct to survive. They ran in every direction, desperate to escape what they now believed was a real-life threat. The narrow corridors of the maze were not designed for such a frenzy. People collided, tripped, and fell, the twisting pathways forcing them to squeeze past one another, their fear turning into full-blown panic. "Move! Get out of the way!" A man shouted as he pushed past others, his face pale with terror. In the stampede, a young woman dressed as a ghost was knocked to the ground, her costume tangled around her legs. She tried to get up, but the crowd surged around her, their frantic movements trampling her dress. Others stumbled over her in the chaos, too consumed by their own panic to notice her cries for help. Several more guests lost their footing on the uneven terrain, falling into the fog that swirled around their ankles, making it difficult to see where they were going. The screams grew louder, echoing through the maze like a chorus of fear. Some people tried to help the fallen, but the pressure of the crowd made it nearly impossible. Max's twisted vision of terror had spiraled out of control, transforming into a nightmarish scene of genuine injury and distress. As if the stampede wasn't bad enough, the maze itself seemed to turn against the guests. Some of the mechanical traps that Max had so carefully planned malfunctioned, triggering at the wrong times. A giant animatronic spider that was supposed to leap out from its hiding place and scare the guests instead activated just as two people stumbled into its area. The massive mechanical legs knocked them to the ground, causing gasps of shock and pain. "Watch out!" someone shouted as a fog machine nearby hissed loudly, shooting out plumes of mist that obscured the already difficult-to-navigate paths. The maze's lighting system flickered erratically, adding to the disorientation, and one of the color lights started releasing smoke. Within the minute, fire started catching through the fabric, walls, and mechanics of the maze. "Fire!" someone screamed, adding to the frenzy. In another section, a trapdoor meant to create the illusion of a bottomless pit swung open unexpectedly, sending a few guests stumbling into its shallow, padded depths. Their panic screams only fueled the frenzy above. The sound effects that had been designed to amplify the fear now seemed almost too real. Groans, chains clinking, and loud bangs created a dissonance that felt like a true horror scene. The maze was no longer just an attraction. It had become a death trap in the minds of those trying to escape. Max's elaborate prank was spiraling far beyond his control, and there was no stopping the momentum. Outside the maze, the scene was just as chaotic. People who had yet to enter or had been watching from the sidelines heard the blood-curdling screams coming from within and instinctively rushed toward the entrance. They weren't sure what was happening, but could tell that whatever it wasn't part of the fun anymore. "Are they really in trouble?" a man asked, his voice tinged with both fear and disbelief as he and a crowd of onlookers surged toward the entrance. Some tried to help by calling out to the people inside, while others stood frozen, unsure of whether to intervene or stay clear of the chaos. Max, now outside of the control room, attempted to manage the growing crowd at the maze's entrance. "Everyone, please stay calm," he shouted, but his words were drowned out by the collective panic of the guests still trapped inside. The situation was slipping further out of his grasp, and for the first time that night, a flicker of doubt crossed his face. He had wanted to create fear, but not like this. This was raw, uncontrolled terror. Now, the smoke was visible and the fire was catching up quickly. The firefighters were taken by surprise, but acted quickly and started doing what they could. As more people crowded the entrance, the panic inside the maze spread outward. Those trying to enter to help found themselves caught in the confusion, some even getting pulled into the maze's twisting paths, adding to the stampede within. The line between guests and rescuers blurred as everyone became part of the same chaotic whirlwind of fear. The once festive atmosphere of Halloween had turned into a nightmare that no one could wake up from, and Max stood at the center of it all, watching his greatest prank unravel into something far more dangerous than he ever anticipated. Chapter 7. Backlash. The aftermath of the chaos was a scene of flashing lights and urgent voices. Paramedics arrived quickly, setting up a triage area near the entrance of the maze. Injured guests lay on stretchers, some with bandages already wrapped around sprained ankles and bruised limbs. The air was filled with the wail of sirens and the soft murmur of medics talking to their patients, besides the scent of smoked wood. A few children, their costumes now torn and dirty, clung to their parents, tears streaming down their faces. The mood among the crowd shifted dramatically from shock to anger. What had started as a night of fun and thrills had turned into something far darker, and they were now looking for someone to blame. All eyes turned to Max, who stood nearby, still in his sinister ringmaster costume. His once confident grin was replaced with a look of unease as he met the furious glares of the guests and their families. "You went too far, Max," shouted one of the injured guests, his voice hoarse and filled with rage. "People got hurt because of your stupid prank." Others joined in, their voices rising in a wave of outrage. "My wife was trampled," another person yelled, pointing accusingly at Max. "What were you thinking, letting it get this out of control? We trusted you." Max opened his mouth to respond, but the words seemed to catch in his throat. He had orchestrated countless pranks before, but he'd never seen one go off the rails like this. And he was starting to realize that his carefully planned scare had real-world consequences that he wasn't ready to face. Luckily for him, there were no casualties, and the fire was controlled before anyone got really hurt. Forcing a smile, Max took a deep breath and tried to defuse the situation the way he always had, with humor. "Hey, come on, everyone," he said, raising his hands as if to calm the crowd. "It was just a little scare gone wrong, right? I mean, we're all here for some Halloween fun. After all," his attempt at a joke fell flat. The anger in the crowd only seemed to intensify, and a few people actually stepped forward, getting right in his face. "A little scare?" A woman snapped, her eyes blazing with fury. "My daughter is in the ambulance right now because of your little scare. You put lives at risk for your twisted game." Max's smile wavered, and he took a step back, realizing that this was no longer something he could laugh off. "Look, I didn't mean for anyone to get hurt," he said, his voice less confident now. "It was supposed to be a controlled environment. I had professionals involved." "Professionals?" Someone else scoffed. "You think that excuse is what happened? You created a death trap and then stood back while people got hurt." Max was losing control of the narrative, and he knew it. He had never been in a situation where his audience wasn't laughing with him, but was instead ready to turn on him. The more he tried to downplay the seriousness of the incident, the more the crowd's anger boiled over. They weren't just upset. They were outraged that he had crossed a line that shouldn't have been crossed. Even as the confrontation continued, videos of the chaos inside the maze were already flooding social media. Clips of the fake kidnapping scene, the panic that ensued, and the injuries that followed spread like wildfire. Hashtags like #Max'sMazeFail, #HalloweenHorror, and #PrankGoneWrong began trending almost instantly, with thousands of people commenting and sharing their outrage. "This is what happens when rich guys with too much time on their hands think they can play with people's lives," read one tweet, accompanied by a shaky video of guests screaming and running in terror. Max's maze was a death trap. How did anyone think this was a good idea? Another post declared, sparking a debate that quickly grew out of control. Influencers and local news outlets picked up the story, criticizing Max for his lack of foresight and responsibility. Some called for him to be held accountable, suggesting that he face legal consequences for the injuries his maze had caused. Others shared their own experiences of fear and confusion from the maze, turning the incident into a cautionary tale about the dangers of pushing pranks too far. As the backlash grew, Max watched helplessly as his name became synonymous with recklessness and irresponsibility. His once loyal followers were now among his biggest critics, demanding apologies and answers. The maze that was supposed to cement his reputation as the ultimate Halloween prankster had instead become a symbol of his biggest failure. Max's attempt to defend his actions only fueled the fire, as every dismissive comment he made was scrutinized, criticized, and turned into another reason for people to be angry. The public wasn't going to let this go easily, and for the first time in his life, Max realized that he might have gone too far, so far that he couldn't find his way back. He recluded himself, and let time pass. Chapter 8. Legend. In the weeks following that chaotic Halloween night, Max's maze was the talk of the town. At first, the conversations were filled with outrage and anger. Stories of injuries, terror, and Max's lack of control dominated local news. But as the dust settled, something strange began to happen. The fear that once drove people away started to transform into fascination. The story of Max's maze, how it went off the rails, and how it terrified everyone who entered it began to take on a life of its own. Whispers spread about how the maze wasn't just a haunted attraction, but an experience so intense that it bordered on the supernatural. You think a regular haunted house is scary? People would say in hushed tones at local gatherings. Max's maze made you believe you were living through a real nightmare. Tales of what happened inside the maze became exaggerated with every retelling, turning it into an urban legend. Over time, the outrage faded, replaced by a morbid curiosity. People who hadn't been there that night now wished they had. The maze became a badge of honor, a challenge that only the bravest would dare to face. Max's creation, originally seen as a disaster, was now regarded as the most thrilling Halloween experience anyone had ever lived through. As Halloween approached the following year, Max made a bold announcement. He was rebuilding the maze, bigger and better than ever. This time, he promised improved safety measures, smarter design, and even more terrifying effects. The new maze was being marketed as the Halloween maze that went too far, a name that played directly into its notorious reputation. Max leaned into the controversy, turning what had once been his downfall into his greatest selling point. "You thought last year's maze was terrifying?" he said in a video that went viral. "This year, we're taking fear to the next level. But don't worry, it's safe maybe." His grin and wink to the camera suggested that while he'd learned from his mistakes, the thrill and the danger were far from over. The buzz around the maze's return was even bigger this time. Tickets sold out faster than ever, with people clamoring to be part of the legend that had captivated the town. Influencers hyped it up as a must-see experience, and thrill-seekers traveled from neighboring cities just to test their courage. Max's maze had evolved from a local Halloween attraction into a phenomenon, a rite of passage for those seeking the ultimate scare. As the grand reopening approached, a new rumor began to spread, a whisper that sent shivers down the spines of even the most skeptical. People started talking about a mysterious figure seen during the chaos of the previous year's maze. Someone who wasn't part of Max's team, someone who seemed to appear and disappear without a trace. Guests from that night recalled seeing a shadowy presence lurking in the maze's darkest corners, watching them with eyes that glowed in the dim light. This figure hadn't been listed on any of Max's plans, nor had any actor come forward to claim responsibility. Some swore they had seen this figure guiding them deeper into the maze, while others claimed it was the reason they couldn't find the exit. Speculation ran wild. Was it just another part of Max's prank that he hadn't admitted to? Or was there something more, something that even Max couldn't explain? People wondered if the maze had taken on a life of its own, as if it were a living entity feeding on fear. The story of the shadowy figure became part of the maze's legend, a mystery that no one could solve. Max, of course, said nothing to confirm or deny the rumors, allowing the mystery to grow. Halloween must continue, he thought to himself, smiling as he watched the excitement build. This year's maze would be scarier, safer, and more legendary than ever. But the secrets hidden within its walls would always remain. After all, what's Halloween without a little mystery? And as the night of the grand reopening approached, one thing was certain. No matter how much fear Max's maze had caused, it would forever be the place where legends were born. Do you agree with how Max was quickly pardoned? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if this powerful tale of ambition and revenge captivated you, don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories. Thanks for watching.